Buy one, get one free, said the dealer. The cowboy bought two Apache sisters at the slave market. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Cold wind pushed dust along the narrow streets of the border town, lifting scraps of paper and rattling loose shutters on empty storefronts. The sky was dull gray, warning that cold would drop harder once the sun disappeared. In the center of the marketplace, a wooden platform for livestock had been turned into a public auction block. Dozens of boots scraped against packed dirt as men closed in to stare at the two women on display. Ayana, the older sister, stood with iron cuffs biting into her wrists and a chain linking her to Sani, who clung tight to her arm. Ayana was 24, strong-built from life in camps where every day meant working to eat. She kept her shoulders back despite a deep ache in her back and legs. Her dress was torn down the front from rough handling, exposing the top of her chest and showing more than she ever wanted strangers to see. Every stare felt like another mark cut into her skin, but she refused to bow her head. It was the only thing she still controlled. Sani, 19, trembled so hard the chain quivered with each breath. She was thinner than Ayana, her shoulder red and raw where the dress had ripped earlier. Her eyes kept scanning every corner for escape that didn't exist. Sani whispered, "Don't let them separate us," almost too quiet to hear. Ayana answered without looking away from the crowd. "They won't." Her voice shook only once. The dealer paced in front of them, a thick man with a hat too small for his head and a voice rough from whiskey. He shouted like he enjoyed every second of this. Two Apache sisters, a hard worker and a young one thrown in the deal. Laughter broke out behind him. Some men leaned forward for a better look at Ayana's body. Others pointed at Sani like she was livestock. Ayana's heart hammered in her chest. She had seen how quickly men change from bidders to owners with no hesitation. She fought to hide her fear because Sani looked to her every second. Sawyer Knox stood at the edge of the crowd, watching silently. He was 38, tall with a broad frame and worn hands that showed years of ranch work. A faded scar cut along his right forearm, a reminder from his years as an Army scout. He lived alone on a ranch 10 miles outside town. His wife and unborn child had died years ago during a complicated birth, something no doctor could save, but Sawyer always carried the guilt like he should have done more. It made him keep distance from people. Silence was easier. He had come into town only to buy extra feed and tools before winter set in. He did not plan this. He did not want to be here, staring at suffering again. But the longer the dealer taunted the sisters, the more Sawyer's chest tightened. He remembered soldiers treating prisoners like objects. He remembered feeling helpless then, too. He hated the feeling. The dealer grabbed the chain suddenly and yanked Ayana forward to show her curves. Sani stumbled and nearly fell. The crowd laughed like it was a joke. Ayana's eyes stayed dry, but her jaw locked hard enough to ache. That was when Sawyer stepped forward. "How much?" His voice cut through the noise. Sharp, controlled. The dealer turned with a smirk. "For both? By the older one, I'll toss the little one in for free." More laughter. No point splitting them. Nobody wants a frightened girl who can't work. Ayana felt humiliation burn in her stomach. Sani's grip on her arm tightened. Sawyer didn't laugh. He named his price plainly. The dealer hesitated for only a second before grabbing Sawyer's money with greedy hands. The chain was shoved towards Sawyer like a leash. Instead, Sawyer dropped the chain to the ground. Ayana and Sani stared in confusion as he knelt and used a tool from his pocket to unlock the cuffs. The metal opened with sharp clicks. The weight fell away from their wrists. The release was almost painful. Sani looked terrified to speak. Ayana forced herself to ask what both feared. "What do you want from us?" Sawyer stood and met her eyes. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You can come with me. My ranch is quiet. You'll have food, a place to sleep. Nobody touches you. Nobody owns you." Ayana didn't trust easily. No one had protected them without expecting something in return. But his eyes didn't search her body. He looked away each time her dress hung too low. His voice stayed steady, neither soft nor demanding. He wasn't pretending to be a hero. He just refused to let them be hurt again today. Sonny whispered. If we say no, then I buy you out of here anyway, Sawyer said quietly. And I get you someplace safe. His jaw tightened. You're not going back on that platform. It wasn't a promise. It was a decision already made. The sisters followed him because the alternative was worse than anything unknown. Sawyer walked on foot while they rode his horse, wrapped together in a blanket. The sun dropped lower. Cold thickened. Every mile from town made the air feel a little less sharp. When the cabin appeared, a simple structure with a smoking chimney and fence corral, Sonny's breath finally eased. The smell of firewood made Ayana's shoulders lower an inch. Inside, the cabin was clean and quiet. One bed, a stove giving off warmth, a table repaired many times but still sturdy. No chains, no ropes. Sawyer set out water and leftover stew. They ate in silence, hungry but still watching him closely. He laid blankets for them on the bed. Then he placed his own bedroll on the floor near the door, rifle within reach. Not pointed at them, pointed at anything outside. Ayana studied him. Why are you really doing this? He did not pretend, because someone should have done it sooner. Sonny cried quietly into the blanket. Not loud, just relief breaking open after too long. Sawyer turned his face away to give her privacy. When a lantern dimmed, the sisters lay together under blankets that smelled of smoke and cedar. Sawyer rested against the door, coat still on, listening for danger. Tomorrow would bring questions. Trust would take time. But tonight they were alive, warm, and unclaimed by anyone. For the first time in months, sleep came without fear. The first light of morning crept through the cabin window, a thin band of pale yellow stretching across the floorboards and climbing slowly toward the bed where Ayana and Sonny slept curled close under Sawyer's blankets. The fire in the stove had burned low, leaving only a faint warmth that clung to the room. Sawyer sat up from his place against the door, his back stiff from the wooden floor, but his hand already reaching for his revolver before his thoughts fully caught up with the new day. He had spent years sleeping like that, half aware, ready for trouble, because life past the edges of town rarely offered quiet without cost. Ayana woke next, her eyes opening fast like someone trained to expect danger the moment sleep ended. She saw Sawyer by the door, rifle close, boots already on. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was, fear tightening her throat and preparing her to run. But then she saw Sonny breathing slow and safe beside her, no rope around their wrists, no shouting men nearby, only the quiet scrape of wind outside. Her body uncoiled a little, though her mind remained alert. Sawyer noticed the shift in her breathing and spoke first so she wouldn't panic. "There's food in the pot," he said, nodding toward the stove. His voice came out low and even like he spent a lifetime learning not to startle people. Ayana looked at him for a moment, searching for any sign his kindness had changed overnight. She found none. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket higher over her chest where the dress still hung torn, and gently shook Sonny awake. The younger woman rubbed her eyes, confusion turning into relief once she recognized the cabin walls. Sawyer stood and reached into a small trunk, pulling out a folded shirt and a length of warm cloth. He placed them on the table, not too close, giving Ayana space to decide whether to accept them. "You can fix your dress with this," he said matter-of-factly. "We'll get you proper clothes later. Today we need to get through a few things first." Ayana watched him carefully. "Like what?" "Work," he answered simply. "There's always work on a ranch." Sonny glanced nervously between them. She wanted to be helpful. She needed a purpose again. Ayana understood that feeling better than she could say. Surviving wasn't enough. Dignity came for being useful. After they ate quietly, Sawyer stepped outside to check the fences and the horses. Ayana took the cloth and began sewing her dress with slow, determined movements. Every stitch felt like claiming a piece of herself back. Sonny cleaned the dishes, hands shaking a little less each time she moved. The cabin wasn't theirs yet, but doing something inside it made fear loosen its grip. When Sawyer returned, he asked Sonny to help gather firewood and feed the chickens. Her shoulders straightened at having a task, and though she stayed close to the cabin door, she worked hard. Sawyer didn't push her farther than she could manage. He just nodded once in approval, and Sonny's face softened like she hadn't received a single kind look in months. Meanwhile, Ayanna followed Sawyer to the barn. She kept distance at first, but curiosity edged out caution. The barn smelled like hay and leather. Tools hung neatly on the walls, nothing like the chaos of the auction yard. Sawyer checked a cracked fence post and handed Ayanna an extra hammer. "Hold it steady," he said. She did, her fingers brushing the rough wood. He swung once, twice, each strike sending a sharp vibration through the board. He didn't talk more than necessary, but every instruction he gave was clear and respectful, never raised in anger. Ayanna found herself studying him while he worked. Not the way other men stared at her, but quietly watching the way he carried weight with his shoulders, the way he avoided stepping too close unless she signaled comfort, the way he always kept himself between her and the open field like he accounted for danger she couldn't see. She finally asked what had gnawed at her since last night. "You said someone should have done it sooner. What did you mean?" Sawyer paused mid-swing, the hammer resting against his leg before he answered. "During the war," he said, keeping his eyes on the fence, "I watched people get treated like they were less than human. Men and women. Some of us tried to stop it. Most just looked away. I did too sometimes." He swallowed once. "Not again." Ayanna didn't reply right away, but she held the post a little steadier. A loud crack snapped across the quiet land. Something in the corral gate had broken loose. The horses kicked and shuffled nervously. Sawyer's posture snapped alert, and he moved fast to check the disturbance. Ayanna followed without hesitation, heart racing even though she didn't know why yet. At the gate, one horse paced restlessly, head jerking toward the road. Tracks in the dirt led from the distance. Not fresh enough to be seconds old, but fresh enough to matter. Sawyer's expression hardened. "Someone came close," he said, scanning the horizon. "Too close." Ayanna's stomach twisted. "Men from the market?" Her voice tightened with fear she couldn't mask. "Maybe," Sawyer answered. "Could be a traveler. But after yesterday, we don't take chances." He closed the gate, checked every latch, then stepped back, eyes on the road. The quiet around them felt heavier now, like the world was listening. Inside her chest, Ayanna's heart pounded. Freedom had always been temporary in her life. She braced herself for the moment it might be taken again. But Sawyer turned to her, meeting her eyes directly. "No one takes you or your sister away from here," he said, voice steady enough to chip away the fear in her ribs. "Not while I'm alive." There was no bravado in his tone. It wasn't a boast. It was simply a fact. Ayanna looked at him long enough for something inside her to shift, just slightly, from survival to trust. She didn't thank him. Words still stuck too easily in her throat. But her stance changed. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing evened. And Sawyer noticed. When they returned to the cabin, Sonny stood inside by the door, holding a piece of firewood like a weapon. She had heard the commotion. She had been ready to defend herself again. Ayanna gently touched her back, reassuring her that nothing was wrong yet. Sonny's eyes flickered with both relief and shame that she panicked so quickly. Sawyer didn't judge. He nodded once, understanding more than he spoke. He set his revolver on the table, but kept it close enough to grab. "You did good," he told Sonny quietly. "Being ready keeps people alive." Sonny's breath caught. She blinked fast. Praise felt unfamiliar. Ayanna looked around the cabin, the stove warming the air, the blankets folded neatly, Sawyer moving around the room with calm purpose, and she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe last night. This place was already changing them. There were still men out there who saw them as property, men who might try to retrieve what they believed they owned. There were still fears that woke with every sound. There were still walls to build around trust. But here, in this cabin, a different kind of life had begun. Ayanna stepped closer to Sawyer, close enough that he noticed the careful approach. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. He saw in the way she stood, her body not braced for pain, but ready for whatever came next, as long as he was standing with them. Outside, wind swept across the ranch, bending the tall grass and carrying a warning of colder nights ahead. Inside, three people who owed each other nothing had already started to build something worth defending. And without speaking it aloud, each one of them understood. They were not alone anymore. Wind pushed against the cabin walls through the afternoon, rattling the window glass as the temperature dropped. Sawyer finished checking the horses again and came inside, brushing dirt from his jacket. Ayanna and Sonny were sitting near the stove, warming their hands. The quiet inside the cabin felt different today, less tense, more like a place where people were meant to live instead of hide. Sawyer took a moment before speaking, choosing his words carefully because he knew every conversation with them mattered. I need a ride into town tomorrow. Supplies, tools, extra blankets before winter sets in harder. His eyes paused on the sisters, not to judge them, but to measure their comfort. You'll be safer here. Doors locked. Rifle by the bed. Ayanna's jaw tightened a moment. She hated being left vulnerable again, even behind strong walls. How far is town? She asked, tried to keep her voice steady. 2 hours on horseback, Sawyer answered. For if someone slows the way. His glance drifted to Sonny gently, not accusing, just honest. Sonny lowered her gaze, embarrassed at being seen as a burden even for a second. Ayanna immediately reached and squeezed her sister's hand. She works hard, she said firmly. Sawyer nodded once. I know, and he meant it. He set extra wood near the stove and pulled food from the cupboard. Jerky, potatoes, a few apples. He made sure they watched where he kept everything. He wasn't trying to be a provider who left them helpless. He was trying to show them how to survive without fear. Ayanna studied him as he worked. Why live alone? She asked suddenly. The question caught Sawyer off guard. He paused, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He didn't look at her right away. My wife and I moved out here to start fresh. She got sick. It happened fast. Too fast. He swallowed the rest of the memory. I buried them both behind the cottonwood tree on the ridge. Sonny blinked. Both? Sawyer nodded once. Her and the child. His voice held no anger, only a deep tiredness. I stopped talking much after that. Stopped expecting anything good to stay. Ayanna didn't try to comfort him with words. She understood loss that left silence behind. Instead, she stood, walked closer, and placed a careful hand on his forearm. It wasn't a bold move, just human contact, steady and unforced. Sawyer froze a second and used a kindness aimed at him. Then he let the moment stay. Not long after, Sawyer showed Sonny how to latch the windows and secure the door bar. She listened closely, repeating each motion until she could do it fast without shaking. Ayanna watched every detail too. She wanted to know how to protect them both if danger came while he was gone. As evening dimmed the sky, Sawyer cooked simple stew, cutting potatoes slow because his shoulder ached from yesterday's work. Ayanna noticed the wince he tried to hide. Without speaking, she took the knife from his hand and finished the job with quicker, cleaner cuts. Sawyer stepped aside, surprised but grateful. They ate together at the small table, not talking much, but every silence between bites felt less like fear and more like peace trying to grow in the gaps. After dinner, Sonny helped wash dishes, humming low under her breath, a habit she'd lost months ago. Ayanna sat by the fire, sewing again. Mending the dress into something she wouldn't be ashamed to wear if Ryder showed up. Sawyer sat on the floor, leaning against the door, sharpening his knife, eyes always shifting to the window every time wind pushed too strong. He couldn't relax fully. Not yet. When night took over, Sawyer stood and grabbed a thick wool coat from a hook on the wall. I'll take a look around outside, he said quietly, just in case someone's riding closer under the dark. The siblings froze automatically, hearts climbing into their throats. Sawyer noticed and spoke before fear returned. I'm coming right back. Stay inside. Keep the door barred. They nodded. He stepped outside with his lantern, sweeping light across the field and trees. The ranch looked empty, quiet, but the horse tracks from earlier still sat fresh in his memory, like a warning. Inside the cabin, Sonny paced once, twice, breath shallow. Ayanna stood and locked the door firmly, then pulled her sister close. He's checking to keep us safe, she whispered. No one is coming tonight. It took a minute, but Sonny believed her. Later, Sawyer returned and knocked twice exactly like he said he would. Once inside, he hung his coat up and rubbed cold from his hands. Nothing out there, he said. Just wind and stars. He didn't mention that he scanned the road far longer than needed. Before sleep, Sawyer gathered his bedroll again by the door. Ayanna watched him move with quiet discipline. There was no pretending. He was ready for trouble always, ready to put himself between danger and them without question. Ayanna lay beside Sani, but didn't close her eyes immediately. The day had brought a new understanding. Sawyer wasn't just helping them survive. He was rebuilding the shape of their lives, piece by piece, with every respectful choice he made. And that scared her almost as much as the men who still might come. Because hope was dangerous after you'd lost everything. Sawyer noticed her still watching him. He held her gaze for a moment longer than yesterday. No words, just quiet acknowledgement that trust was forming, slow but real. Ayanna finally lay back down, the blanket warm over both sisters. Sani curled close, no longer shaking. Outside, coyotes called far in the distance. The wind eased. The ranch settled into stillness. Sawyer did not sleep quickly. He listened carefully to every shift in the night, rifle within reach. When he finally let his eyes close, he knew one thing with certainty. He was no longer protecting strangers. These two women were now part of his world, and he would defend that world with everything he had left. Tomorrow meant riding into town, where enemies might already be waiting or watching. Tonight, though, he let the quiet stay. Inside those cabin walls, 3 people, each scarred, each rebuilt by hardship, were learning how to breathe again. And for the first time in a very long time, Sawyer Knox wasn't wondering how to survive the future. He was beginning to care enough to fight for it. The sun had barely risen when Sawyer saddled the horse, tightening the cinch with firm, practiced movements. Frost coated the grass outside, crunching under his boots as he moved around the yard. Inside the cabin, Ayanna tied back her hair and helped Sani finish buttoning the shirt Sawyer had given her. The younger sister still felt nervous, but today her hands trembled less. Sawyer stepped inside, had already pulled low. "I'll be gone a few hours," he said. "I'll ride fast." He placed a small pistol on the table, not pointed at them, just there. "If someone comes, you lock the door and take this. You don't hesitate." He looked at Ayanna directly. No warnings, no second chances. Ayanna nodded once. There was fear in her chest, but she didn't let it show. If danger came while he was gone, she would protect Sani without hesitation. Sani stepped forward, voice soft but clear. "You'll come back." Sawyer answered without thinking. "Yes." He didn't leave space for doubt. Ayanna opened the door for him, and cold air rushed in. Sawyer paused as if wanting to say more, but settled on a quiet, steady look that said he trusted them to take care of themselves. Then he turned and walked toward the horse. He didn't look back, but Ayanna and Sani watched from the window until he disappeared down the trail. The moment he was gone, silence pressed harder on the cabin. Sani hugged herself tightly. What if those men from town come? Her breath came short. Ayanna placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we will fight." She reached for the pistol, checking its weight. Heavy, but manageable. "And he will return." To distract her, they worked. Ayanna gathered eggs from the small chicken pen, watching the road every few minutes. Sani boiled water for washing and swept the floor. Doing tasks helped both of them breathe easier. But quiet ranch work wasn't enough to erase worry. Hours passed. Every sound outside made them freeze. Wind shifting the barn door, branches tapping the wall, the distant call of a hawk. Inside, Sani suddenly stopped moving. "Do you think you will want us to leave once we are better?" The fear in her voice wasn't about safety, it was about belonging. Ayanna lowered the basket of eggs slowly. She had wondered the same thing. "I don't think he would have brought us here if he planned to send us away." She forced a small, reassuring smile. "He is not like those men in town." Sani's eyes warmed, but uncertainty remained. By midday, the cold had eased a little, and Ayanna carried a bucket toward the well. She scanned the open land as she walked, the corral, the ridge, the distant road where hoof tracks might appear before riders did. She wasn't used to trusting a place enough to turn her back on it. A distant sound carried on the wind. Hooves again. Ayanna dropped the bucket and ran back inside, breath sharp. "Someone's coming." Sani's hand shook as she barred the door, just like Sawyer taught. Ayanna grabbed the pistol and crouched near the window. Two riders approached from the south, wrong direction for Sawyer's return. Their movements were slow and searching. They weren't neighbors. Ayanna's heart banged at her chest. Sonny pressed against the wall, holding her breath. The riders stopped near the corral, scanning the ranch. One spat into the dirt. "Tracks lead here," he said, voice loud enough for them to hear. "He ain't keeping what's ours." Cold dread spread through Ayanna's body, but she didn't step back. She pressed closer to the window, watching their every move. The second man dismounted, rough boots dragging through the dirt. "Door's shut," he grinned. "Means someone's inside." Sonny quietly started crying, trying not to make sound. Ayanna reached back, squeezing her hand once, firm enough to silence panic. "Stay quiet," she whispered. The first man grabbed the cabin door handle and shoved hard. The bar held. "Open up," he shouted. "We just want what was stolen." Ayanna positioned herself behind the stove, gun aimed at the door with both hands. She remembered Sawyer's words, no warnings. The man kicked again. Wood splintered. "Fine. We'll take him one at a time." Sonny covered her mouth with shaking fingers. Ayanna felt fire build behind her ribs. Not fear, but rage. They were not going back. She cocked the hammer back. The sound clicked like a judge passing sentence. Before the door broke, hoofbeats thundered from the direction of town. Fast. Direct. The riders spun, startled. Sawyer. He charged across the yard, rifle raised. His voice cut sharp across the ranch. "Leave. Now." The men hesitated only a second before one reached for his gun. Sawyer fired first. The bullet hit the dirt an inch from the man's boot, close enough to show he wasn't warning again. The intruders cursed, scrambling onto their horses. "We'll be back," they yelled as they rode off fast, disappearing behind the slope. Only when the dust settled did Ayanna realize she had been holding her breath too long. She lowered the pistol slowly. Sawyer dismounted, breath heavy, shoulder heaving with tension. He pushed through the door and scanned the room fast, eyes clearing only when he saw both sisters unhurt. Ayanna stood tall, the gun still in her hand. Sawyer looked at it, then at her, and something unspoken passed between them. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't running. "You did good," he said softly. Sonny rushed toward him and hugged his arm tightly, trembling with relief. Sawyer stood stiff for a second, not used to someone seeking safety in his presence. Then he placed a calming hand on her back. Ayanna stepped closer, heart still beating fast. "They knew we were here." "I know." Sawyer's anger simmered behind his steady voice. "They won't get a second chance." He placed the pistol back on the table, then turned to Ayanna, closer now than he had ever stood before. Her breathing slowed, their eyes locked, tension thick between them. Sawyer reached up slowly and brushed a small piece of hay from her hair, careful not to touch more than necessary. It was a small gesture, but it held meaning, comfort, respect, connection. Sonny wasn't the only one who had been scared. "Thank you," Ayanna finally whispered, voice quiet but full of truth. Sawyer nodded, jaw tight. "I'll reinforce the door, and tomorrow I'll speak to the sheriff." But both of them knew law didn't always protect the right people. As Sawyer worked, Ayanna stayed close, watching him with new understanding. He hadn't just saved their lives. He wanted them here. They were no longer guests, no longer rescued strangers. Something deeper had begun, something worth staying alive for. Outside, the wind carried the last echo of departing hooves, proof that danger would return. Inside, Sawyer, Ayanna, and Sonny stood together, stronger than yesterday. The ranch was no longer just a shelter. It was home, and a home worth fighting for. Sawyer spent the next hour reinforcing the cabin door, adding extra nails and a crossbar thick enough that even a charging bull would have a hard time getting through. Every strike of the hammer echoed through the small space, a steady reminder of the threat still hanging over them. Ayanna stood nearby, arms crossed, watching through the window each time wind shifted a strange shape across the field. Sonny stayed close too, eyes still wide, but grounded by Sawyer's presence. When he finished, Sawyer set the hammer down and turned to them. "They won't try again today," he said. They wanted fear more than a fight, and they got what they came for. He stepped away from the door and stretched his shoulder, the strain visible now that adrenaline had faded. But they'll come back better prepared. Ayanna didn't flinch. Then we'll be ready. Sawyer stopped a moment, reading the determination in her face. It wasn't bravado. It was the kind of resolve people only built after surviving too much. He gave a small nod of respect. Sani moved to the stove and busied her hands with reheating the stew. Doing something normal seemed to calm her nerves. Ayanna helped set the table, though her attention never left the door for long. Sawyer knelt near the small trunk under his bedroll and pulled out a folded map. I know who those men are, he started. They work for the drunk buyer from the auction. Name's Cowboy. He doesn't take humiliation quiet. Ayanna stiffened at the sound of that name. She remembered the greed in his eyes when the dealer mocked them. He will want revenge, she said. Yes, Sawyer confirmed. Men like him hold grudges tighter than money. Sani placed bowls on the table and sat down carefully. What does he want with us? There are others he could take. Sawyer didn't sugarcoat it. Because you stood tall when he tried to break you, he said to Ayanna. And because he thinks he owns what he paid for. Ayanna's fist curled until her knuckles whitened. He never owned us. Not for 1 second. Sawyer's eyes held hers. That's what makes him dangerous. They ate together, slower this time, tension lingering in every corner of the cabin. The food warmed their bodies, but not their worries. Sawyer finished first and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. If trouble comes again, we go somewhere safer for a while. There's a small canyon shelter a few miles north. Hard to reach. Good protection. Sani lowered her spoon. Not hide, Sawyer corrected. Hold ground where we have the advantage. Ayanna studied him. You've thought about this before. Sawyer looked at his hands like he could still see blood there from another life. War teaches you to plan for the worst and expect worse than that. Sani's gaze softened. Ayanna's curiosity sharpened. If you know how to fight, Ayanna asked quietly, why did you walk away from the army? Sawyer hesitated. His eyes darkened with memories he rarely let surface. Because I was good at killing, he said low. Too good. His jaw tensed. And I didn't want that to be the only thing left of me. Ayanna held his stare. She saw truth there. Heavy, imperfect, human. You're not that man here. Sawyer breathed once, deeper than before. I'm trying. As evening crept closer, Sawyer prepared a second pistol and handed it to Ayanna. This time, she didn't hesitate to take it. Her grip was steady. She practiced pulling back the hammer, then lowering it safely. Sawyer guided her hand once, his touch brief but sure. Ayanna's pulse kicked harder when his fingers brushed hers, but she didn't pull away. Sani watched them, and despite everything, a small hopeful smile appeared for the first time since they arrived. Later, Sawyer insisted they practice a signal. If I say get down, you drop. No questions. If I motion you to run, you run. Understand? Both nodded. Sawyer checked the windows again, then finally allowed himself to sit by the fire. The sisters joined him, the warmth gathering around them like a fragile shield against the world outside. For a while they didn't talk, just listened to the crackling wood and the distant howl of a lone coyote. Sani's eyelids sagged with fatigue. Ayanna guided her to the bed and pulled the blankets over her shoulders. Rest, she whispered. Once Sani slept, Sawyer stood to place another log in the stove. Ayanna watched him, knowing this peace was temporary but grateful for every second. You protected us today, she said quietly. Not because you had to, because you wanted to. Sawyer kept his eyes on the fire. People like Carter think the world owes them. They take until someone stands in their way. And now you're in his way. Ayanna stepped closer, voice calm. Why? Sawyer turned to her, expression honest and unguarded. Because you deserve a life where you're not hunted, not owned, not terrified to close your eyes. Ayanna's breath slipped out slow. And you? What do you deserve? Sawyer didn't speak right away. His eyes softened in a way she hadn't seen before. Maybe a reason to wake up again. Something inside Ayanna broke open then. Not pain, but a warmth she almost didn't recognize. She took one small step closer. The distance between them narrowed until Sawyer could feel her breath against his collarbone. Her hand rose, hesitated, then rested gently against his chest, right over the steady beat of his heart. Sawyer didn't move away. For a moment, both of them forgot fear existed. That men might return, that the world outside these walls was cruel and unforgiving. There was only the steady breathing between them. Ayanna slowly let her hand fall, her eyes holding his a beat longer. "We'll fight with you," she said, "no matter what comes." Sawyer nodded. "We'll face it together." Night thickened. The wind calmed. Sawyer returned to his place near the door, rifle close, but tonight he wasn't just on guard. He was protecting something he believed in. Ayanna lay beside Sonny, heart steady for the first time in months. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one truth clearly. Sawyer Knox was worth trusting, and this ranch was no longer a hiding place. It was where they would stand their ground. Rain clouds gathered thick and dark by morning, pushing heavy air across the ranch and dimming the sky until it looked like evening instead of dawn. Sawyer stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the weather settle in like another unwelcome guest. He hadn't slept more than a couple of hours. His mind kept replaying the gunman's threats, imagining every way they might return. Ayanna woke quietly and found him there. She pulled the repaired dress over her shoulders, the stitching neat thanks to hours spent by the fire the night before. She moved to his side slowly, not wanting to break his concentration. "Storm's coming," he said without turning. "A storm is better than riders," she answered, voice calm. Sawyer finally looked at her. Ayanna's expression held a steadiness he had not expected. Yesterday, she had faced danger without breaking. Today, she stood even stronger. He nodded once, grateful for it. Sonny stirred from the bed, her hair messy and her eyes foggy with sleep. She stretched and sat up, blinking at the gray light. "When will we move to the canyon shelter?" she asked, remembering Sawyer's plan. "Not today," Sawyer said. "Weather this rough will slow anyone trying to find us. Staying put is the safer move." Ayanna helped Sonny braid her hair while Sawyer lit the stove again and started heating water. The simple routine kept everyone from sinking too deep into fear. When breakfast was done, Sawyer laid out what he needed them to learn next. "Weapons are one thing," he said, "but knowing the land keeps you alive longer." He spread the map on the table again and pointed to areas around the ranch. "There's a creek down this ridge, a cave up north near the shelter. And here," he tapped a mark west of the fields, "is a lookout point. If you spot riders from there, you'll know before they reach us." Sonny studied the map closely, tracing the paths with her fingertips. Understanding their surroundings helped her confidence grow. Ayanna committed the landmarks to memory quickly. She had always learned fast when survival depended on it. After breakfast, Sawyer offered Ayanna a coat to shield against the wind. She hesitated before slipping into it. The coat was large on her, the sleeves falling past her wrists. Sawyer looked away respectfully as she adjusted it around her shoulders. "I'll teach you how to ride properly today," he said. "If things go wrong, you can't depend on someone else to get you out." Ayanna stepped outside with him, the cold air stinging her cheeks. Sonny watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Sawyer led his calmest horse, a mare named Willow, toward Ayanna. "Place your foot here," he said, guiding her to the stirrup. His hand hovered near her back to catch her if she slipped, but he didn't touch unless she needed it. Ayanna mounted slowly, her muscles tense. The height made her heart race a little. Sawyer looked up at her. "You're safe. I've got you." Her grip loosened slightly. He walked beside the horse as she practiced guiding the reins, patient with every shift and mistake. At one point, the mare took a faster step and Ayanna gasped, leaning forward too quickly. Sawyer reached up, steadying her foot. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough to feel something more than fear between them. By midday, she could guide the horse around the corral without Sawyer holding the lead rope. Sonny clapped quietly from the porch, a small smile lifting her worried eyes. Inside for lunch, Sawyer's shoulder gave another sharp pull when he reached for a pot. Ayanna noticed immediately. "Let me," she insisted, taking over. Sawyer didn't argue. He could feel limits creeping in from that old wound. It angered him to be anything less than strong when danger waited outside. Sonny sat across from him, timid but curious. "How did you get hurt?" she asked gently. Sawyer paused. It wasn't a secret, just a memory he didn't enjoy opening. "Caught a bullet outside Fort Garland a few years back," he explained. "Didn't heal right. Cold weather reminds me." Ayanna watched him quietly. The scar wasn't just flesh, it marked everything he left behind. The rain finally broke open in the afternoon, loud against the roof. The cabin dimmed under the storm shadow. Sawyer checked every window and latch again, then sat by the fire with a cloth and oil to clean his rifle. Ayanna sat near him, close enough for their shoulders to almost touch. "Why didn't you stay with the army?" she asked. "You were trained. You knew how to survive." Sawyer kept his focus on the weapon as he spoke. "War makes men think they're strong because they're armed. But strength isn't shooting faster. It's choosing who you protect." Ayanna listened carefully. "And you choose us now?" Sawyer stopped working for just a second. His voice lowered, steady and certain. "Yes, I do." Ayanna's pulse kicked at the words. She looked at his profile, the rough shape of a man who had seen too many graves, and realized he wasn't just offering them shelter. He was building a future where they weren't afraid. Sonny, who had been mending blankets on the bed, looked up with the smallest expression of relief. Sawyer's presence no longer confused her. It comforted her. As night fell early under the storm's weight, thunder cracked somewhere far beyond the fields. Sawyer loaded the rifle and set it by the door. Then he poured warm water into a basin and slid it toward Ayanna and Sonny. "Wash before bed. Help sleep," he said. They did, one behind a hanging blanket for privacy while the other stayed near the fire. Sawyer turned his back while Ayanna washed, eyes fixed firmly toward the window. But he was aware of every soft splash of water behind him, every shift of movement. Attraction wasn't something he welcomed easily. It felt dangerous, like a line he wasn't sure he deserved to cross. But he felt it anyway. When Ayanna emerged, her hair slightly damp, Sawyer looked at her longer than he meant to. She held the blanket close over her chest, but there was no shame in her posture now. Only strength. Sonny fell asleep quickly, exhaustion finally pulling her under. Ayanna lay beside her, awake in the dark, watching Sawyer keep his midnight watch again, shoulder against the wall, rifle upright beside him. "You should sleep," she whispered. Sawyer shook his head. "I sleep lighter than the rain." "It's enough." Ayanna shifted, her voice low. "You don't have to carry every worry alone." Sawyer exhaled, slow and tired. "That's the only way I know." Ayanna's eyes softened. "Maybe not anymore." Thunder rolled across the land again. Sawyer finally allowed his head to rest back, eyes closing for a moment as Ayanna watched him with new understanding. They were no longer living separate lives under the same roof. They were learning to breathe together. Outside, the storm covered the ranch in noise. Inside, under dim firelight, something quiet and fragile grew stronger. Trust. And with trust came a new danger neither of them dared name yet. Hope. The storm stretched into the next morning, the rain less violent but steady enough to keep the ground soaked and muddy. Sawyer woke early despite barely sleeping, the familiar ache in his shoulder flaring as he pushed himself upright. The air inside the cabin held the scent of damp wood and cooked stew from the night before. Ayanna was already awake, sitting at the table sharpening one of the small knives. She didn't look up until he had fully sat up, then offered a short nod, acknowledging both his vigilance and his exhaustion without needing words. Sonny still slept, curled beneath the blanket, breathing calm for once. Sawyer set his boots on quietly and moved toward the window, checking the ridge again. No horses, no men. The world outside looked washed clean but tense, like danger was hiding just beyond the gray horizon. Ayanna stood and joined him, her shoulder brushing lightly against his arm for a second before she pretended it hadn't happened. "They might wait for clearer weather." "They will," Sawyer replied. "Men like Bray don't quit. He'll think he has something to prove." Ayanna's jaw tightened. "Then we should take that power from him." Sawyer looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't speaking from fear. She was speaking from ownership of her life. He respected that more than she knew. Sonny stirred awake, her voice thick with sleep. "Will we go to the canyon today?" Sawyer shook his head. "Not in this weather. Harder ground buys us time. Mud slows horse tracks and slows anyone trying to follow them here." Ayana turned towards Sani. "We stay close together. We watch. We help him guard the ranch." Sani nodded, gathering her blanket around her like armor. Sawyer set a small pot on the stove. "Eat first," he said. "Then we work." The morning routine didn't erase the danger, but it gave structure to their fear. Sawyer taught Sani how to stack firewood in a way that kept it dry. He checked the barn with Ayana at his side. The horses snorted nervously, hooves shifting restlessly from the scent of cold rain and distant wolves. Inside the barn, Sawyer showed Ayana how to reinforce the inside latch. "If you get trapped here," he said, "you can still keep them out." "You think of everything," Ayana said. "War teaches that if you miss one detail, someone dies," Sawyer answered plainly. She understood that kind of weight, responsibility born from survival. Back in the cabin, Sani cleaned up breakfast while humming a soft tune. It startled her when she realized she was doing it, because that part of herself had been buried since captivity. Ayana noticed, gave her a quiet smile, and Sani's cheeks flushed with shy pride. Later, Sawyer spread the map again, this time pointing to a small creek running behind the ranch. "If they attack the front again, this is where you escape. Through the water. Harder to track footsteps." Ayana committed every detail to memory. "We won't be caught," she said. But Sawyer wasn't finished. He pulled out a small leather pouch and slid it across the table toward her. Inside lay bullets, enough to mean something. Ayana stared at them, then met his eyes. "You trust me with this?" "If I didn't trust you," Sawyer said, "you wouldn't be here." She swallowed once. Trust was a language she was still learning. Afternoon came with the storm still hanging overhead, too quiet to feel safe. Sawyer stepped outside to check the perimeter one more time. Ayana followed him, her repaired dress now covered by the coat he'd given her. "Why risk yourself for us?" she asked suddenly. The question had lived inside her since that first night. Sawyer slowed, breath visible in the cold air. "Because once someone risked something for me," he said, "and I wasn't strong enough to return the favor. I lost everything anyway." His voice stayed steady, but Ayana could hear all the pain behind it. "I won't fail again." Ayana took one step closer. Rain dotted her hair as she stared up at him. "You didn't fail us. You saved us." Sawyer's eyes shifted away, struggling with the weight of her gratitude. "I haven't saved you yet." Ayana reached out and touched his hand, deliberate this time. Sawyer's fingers tensed beneath hers, then slowly relaxed. He lifted his gaze back to her, and something wordless passed between them. Recognition, desire, a promise neither dared speak yet. Before either could say more, Sani appeared at the doorway. "Someone's on the road." Sawyer and Ayana snapped into focus instantly. They hurried to the porch, and Sawyer lifted his rifle, scanning through the rain. One rider. Not two. Not three. Just one horse approaching slow, cautious. Sawyer didn't lower the gun. "Stay behind me," he ordered quietly. The horse stopped a short distance away, its rider raising a hand in peace. When he spoke, his voice carried through the cold air. "Name's Sheriff Dalton," he said. "I heard about an incident. Carter Bray's making noise in town." Sawyer narrowed his eyes, but lowered the rifle slightly. The sheriff dismounted with care, not cocky, not aggressive. He looked tired, older than his years. Rain dripped off the brim of his hat. "He claims you stole property from him," Dalton continued. "People aren't property," Sawyer said flatly. The sheriff's eyes shifted to the sisters standing behind Sawyer. He saw their fear. He saw their bruises. He looked back at Sawyer and nodded once. "I ain't here to return them," Dalton said. "I'm here to warn you. Bray wants blood now. He's talking about gathering men. You need to be ready." Sawyer nodded once. "We will be." The sheriff hesitated, then added quietly, "Town's law doesn't stretch far out here. You'll be on your own." Sawyer didn't react. He'd always been on his own. Dalton tipped his hat to the women. "Stay alert." Then he turned his horse and rode off into the rain. Sani's excitement was gone now, replaced by the returning fear. Ayana closed the door and slid the bar back into place. Sawyer set the rifle against his shoulder, feeling the weight of what was coming. He's right, Ayanna said. They will gather more men. Sawyer looked at her, a quiet fire building in his eyes. Then we make this ranch a place no one can take. Ayanna stepped closer again, voice low. We're not running. Sawyer shook his head. We make our stand here. Sonny moved beside them, her fears slowly turning into resolve. Together, she whispered. Sawyer placed his hand gently on the back of her head, a protective gesture he hadn't planned. Together, he repeated. Ayanna stared at Sawyer, feeling a surge of strength in her chest she hadn't felt since childhood. They were no longer victims waiting for rescue. They were defenders, survivors. A man who had lost everything was building a reason to fight again. Two women who had been stripped of freedom now had a home, and someone willing to bleed to protect it. Outside, the storm continued to pound the earth. Inside, three lives stood ready to face what would come next, not with fear, but with a shared determination to never be taken again. Night returned early under the heavy sky. Rain stopped, but the cold sharpened as if winter wanted to take the land in one breath. Sawyer checked every corner of the ranch, barn doors, fences, the shadowed side of the cabin, before coming inside. He said little, but his jaw stayed tight the entire time. Ayanna watched him carefully, understanding what he didn't say. Danger was closer than the rain clouds now. Sonny sat at the table sorting dry beans, trying to look busy instead of scared. Every clink of a bean hitting the tin bowl made the cabin feel too quiet. Ayanna finished washing the plates and sat next to her sister. Sawyer stood near the door, rifle leaned against his leg, listening for sounds only he seemed to hear. Hours passed with slow, tense silence. Sawyer barely blinked. Ayanna finally stepped closer. You need rest, she said. You'll be no good to us if you fall asleep holding that gun. Sawyer didn't move. I'll sleep when I know you're safe. Ayanna folded her arms. We are safe right now. Her voice was calm but strong. And you're not alone here anymore. We watch with you. She pointed her chin towards Sonny. She can rest. I can stay awake. Sawyer studied her face as if searching for cracks, fear, doubt, hidden panic. Instead, he found only resolve. He let out a slow breath. Just 1 hour, he said. Ayanna nodded. 1 hour. He lay down near the door, rifle beside him, his fingers finally loosening their grip. Within minutes, his breathing deepened, exhaustion winning out. Ayanna kept the lamp low and sat by the window with the pistol within reach. She didn't move, didn't blink much, her eyes trained on the dark outside the glass. Sonny eventually fell asleep against her shoulder. Ayanna stayed alert the entire time. When Sawyer's hour ended, she gently touched his shoulder. His eyes snapped open immediately, trained by years of danger, but when he saw her, the tension lifted from his body. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded once. We protect each other. As dawn approached, the wind dropped, so suddenly the silence made Sawyer step outside quickly. Clear sky stretched overhead at last. No movement along the ridge. No threat in sight. That morning, Sawyer taught Sonny to fire the pistol. She flinched at the noise, but on the third try she hit the tin can. She stared at it in disbelief, then looked to Sawyer, who gave her a small, approving nod, the kind that could rebuild someone's spirit faster than any word. A turn happened in Sonny's posture then. Fear stepped back, purpose stepped forward. Ayanna took a longer turn practicing with a rifle. She aimed clean and steady, shoulders squared. Sawyer stood behind her, close enough to correct her grip, his hands brushing lightly against hers. She felt the firmness of his guidance, and his careful restraint sent heat rushing up her neck. When she hit the target dead center, Sawyer's voice dipped low. Pride, not surprise. You're ready. Ayanna lowered the rifle, trying to hide the satisfaction that warmed her chest. I've been ready a long time, she said. I just needed someone to believe it. Sawyer held her gaze. I do. As the sun climbed higher, Sawyer gathered supplies. Extra bullets, rope, water, blankets, placing everything near the back door. Ayanna noticed his plan forming. We will go to the canyon soon, she said. Before nightfall, Sawyer confirmed. They'll ride under daylight, thinking intimidation works better. And if they come before we leave? Ayanna asked. Sawyer tightened the strap on his holster. Then we remind them whose land this is. Sonny shivered, fear tugging gently at her bravery. Sawyer knelt so he could speak to her eye level. You two changed this place, he said. There was nothing worth fighting for until you walked into that town. I won't lose that again. Sonny blinked hard, emotion filling her eyes. Ayana's chest ached at his honesty. They worked together the rest of the day, packing food, tending horses, spreading ash around the cabin foundation to track footprints. Sawyer taught them a whistle signal. One note for danger near, two for run. It felt like preparing for war. Because they were. By late afternoon, Sawyer stood on the porch scanning the road again. Ayana joined him, crossing her arms for warmth though the coat helped. Why don't we just leave now, she asked. Because, Sawyer said, eyes fixed on the horizon, running teaches the enemy he can chase. I want him to learn that chasing us costs him more than he's willing to pay. Ayana felt something rise in her chest then, respect turning into admiration, admiration into something deeper she didn't try to name. She stepped closer, shoulder brushing as lightly. Sawyer didn't move away. You didn't just save us, she murmured. You gave us a reason to fight. He finally turned, his gaze lowering to her face. You gave it back to me. The air between them thickened, close enough to feel breath, close enough that Ayana's heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted to leap into his hands. Sawyer's eyes dropped briefly to her lips, then back up with quiet restraint. He didn't step back. Ayana didn't either. It wasn't danger that made their hearts race. It was the realization that life had given them something new, something fragile, something worth surviving for. But the moment broke when Sonny burst out of the cabin, voice sharp with alarm. Sawyer, a rider. Sawyer's body snapped into readiness instantly. He moved forward, Ayana right beside him. They stopped at the edge of the porch. A single figure emerged over the ridge, moving fast. Not the sheriff, not a lone traveler. Someone armed. Sawyer grabbed the rifle from Ayana's hands, scanning through the scope. Just one man, but his face recognizable even from distance. Carter Bray, and he wasn't alone in spirit. His smirk meant reinforcements waited just over the horizon. Sawyer's teeth ground together. He's here to talk, he said darkly, which means he thinks words are still worth something to him. What do we do? Ayana asked, already bracing herself. Sawyer passed the rifle back to her and stepped down from the porch. We give him one chance to leave, he said. Only one. As Sawyer moved toward Bray, the earth held its breath. Ayana lifted the rifle to her shoulder, aim trained smooth on Bray's chest. Sonny stood near the cabin door, gripping the pistol with both shaking hands. Sawyer stopped 10 paces away from the mounted man. Ride home, Sawyer warned. Bray's grin widened, cruel and careless. I'll ride home when you hand over what's mine. Ayana's grip tightened. Rage burned hot through her veins. Not fear this time. Rage at the audacity of a man who still believed in ownership of human beings. Sawyer's voice dropped low, lethal. They were never yours. Bray leaned forward in his saddle, smiling like he was already winning. My boys are coming from the south. You can't protect them and yourself. Oh, I can, Sawyer answered, eyes narrowing, and I will. Bray spat into the dirt. Then you die first. Sawyer didn't blink. Not today. The rainwater still clinging to the ground reflected both men's boots and the thin line between violence and final justice. Ayana took a slow breath, finger hovering near the trigger. Sonny steadied her stance. The moment had come. It wasn't about escape anymore. It was about ending this. And Sawyer, Ayana, and Sonny would not run. They would stand their ground. Because home was not a place they planned to abandon. It was a life they would fight to protect, together. Bray's horse pawed at the wet earth, nostrils flaring as cold wind whipped through the open yard. Sawyer stood perfectly still in front of him, shoulders squared, boots planted like they had grown into the ground. Ayana held the rifle steady from the porch, finger brushing the trigger, every muscle tight with focus. Sonny stood to her side, hands wrapped around the pistol, breath sharp but controlled. Bray smirked as if this whole scene amused him. You think you won something? He called out. You bought a pair of problems. I'm here to collect what's mine, one way or another. Sawyer's jaw tensed. They're under my protection. Bray snorted. You think you scare me? You're one man. Sawyer's eyes stayed locked on him. One is enough today. Bray leaned forward in the saddle, voice dripping with arrogance. You can't keep both. That word, keep, snapped something inside Ayanna. She took a step forward, rifle never shaking. We belong to no one, she said, voice strong, echoing across the open field. Bray finally looked directly at her. His smile turned filthy. You belong to whoever's strong enough to claim you. The moment those words left his mouth, Sawyer moved. He stepped closer, hand hovering over his revolver. Bray's grin vanished. Go ahead, Bray spat. Draw. Sawyer didn't. Not yet. Last chance, he warned. Right away. Leave this territory. Don't come back. Bray spat again. Not leaving without them. Sawyer exhaled once, a slow, final breath of patience. Then he drew. The motion was clean and fast, years of practice sharpening every line of it. Bray jerked for his holster, but he was too slow. Sawyer's bullet hit him in the shoulder, knocking him sideways off the saddle with a shout of pain. He crashed into the mud, clutching the wound, rage twisting his face blood red. Before Bray could aim again, Ayanna fired. Her shot struck his pistol, knocking it from his grip and sending it skidding through the dirt. Sawyer glanced back briefly, impressed, and then turned his full focus back on Bray. Sonny covered her mouth, shocked at her sister's accuracy, but also proud, because Ayanna hadn't just survived today. She had fought. Bray groaned, eyes darting frantically toward the road. Boys, he screamed. Now! But no one came. Silence. Sawyer stepped forward, rifle aimed steady. They're not coming, he said calmly. Sheriff rode out earlier. He told me law won't help me, but he also told them the same. Bray's face twisted, disbelief turning into helpless fury. You can't kill me, he hissed. Town will. Town doesn't care about you. Sawyer cut him off. Or what you do to people. But I care about them. He nodded toward Ayanna and Sonny. Bray froze at the words. Not because they sounded kind, but because they carried absolute conviction. Stand up, Sawyer ordered. Bray slowly rose, hand pressed against his bleeding shoulder. He trembled, not from pain, but from fear he'd never felt before. Ayanna and Sonny walked down from the porch to stand beside Sawyer. He didn't have to ask. They chose to stand with him. Sawyer's voice lowered, steel underneath. You're leaving this territory tonight. If you ever return, he stepped forward, muzzle close to Bray's forehead. It won't be your shoulder next time. Bray's breath faltered. He nodded shakily, eyes wide, pride shattered. Sawyer jerked his head toward the horse. Get on, ride, and don't look back. Bray staggered, pulled himself into the saddle with difficulty, and took off down the road in a panic. The three of them stood watching until he was nothing but a fading speck among the distant trees. Only when the sound of hooves disappeared entirely did Sawyer lower his weapon. The threat was gone, for good. Rain clouds finally broke apart, letting late afternoon sunlight spill across the ranch for the first time in days. Sawyer led the women inside and shut the door, not with fear but routine. They all stood there with adrenaline still pumping through their veins, barely breathing. Sonny was the first to move. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Sawyer, burying her face against his chest as tears streamed freely. Thank you, she whispered, voice trembling. Thank you for not letting them take us. Sawyer placed a protective hand on the back of her head. You're safe now, he said, steady as ever. Both of you are. Ayanna watched them, her heart swelling with something warm and overwhelming. When Sonny stepped back, wiping her tears, Ayanna approached Sawyer slowly, intentional, sure. She looked up at him, her voice quiet but full of strength. You didn't just protect us. You gave us our lives back. Sawyer swallowed hard. He wasn't used to gratitude. He wasn't used to being someone's hope. You saved yourselves, he answered. I just stood with you. Ayanna shook her head. No, she stepped closer, so close their breath mixed in the faint warmth of the cabin. You stood for us when no one else would. Her hand reached up, hesitant for a heartbeat, then rested on his cheek. Sawyer closed his eyes briefly, the touch soft and grounding. When he opened them, they held the same fire she saw the night he freed them. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was steady, certain, and real. Ayana's hands slid gently to the sides of his coat. His hand cupped the back of her head, anchoring her like she was something precious and chosen, not owned or claimed, but loved. Sonny smiled through her drying tears. Hope it found a home here, too. When it finally drew apart, Sawyer let out a quiet breath. "This is your home," he said, "for as long as you want it." Ayana looked at Sonny, who nodded with unwavering trust. Ayana turned back to Sawyer, eyes shining. "Then we stay." Sawyer rested his forehead gently against hers. "Good," he whispered. "No more running." The sun set behind the ridge, casting the cabin in golden light. Sawyer sat at the table repairing a loose stirrup strap. Ayana chopped vegetables for dinner, and Sonny hummed while setting plates. The air held laughter now, soft, uncertain, but real. Outside, the land stretched quiet and peaceful. No chains, no threats, no fear. Inside the cabin, 3 lives stitched themselves together by choice. Found family, belonging, love earned through survival and the simple act of staying. Sawyer Knox had lost everything once. Now he had everything that mattered. And Ayana and Sonny, once auctioned as nothing, were home. Together. Safe. Loved. Forever.